Hello and welcome to the Export Marketing and Preparing for the West Africa Connect trade event. My name is Karen Gibbs with Byhand Consulting, and it is a pleasure to be working with you on this program. Today we have our 8th of 8 videos, coaching videos on topics related to export marketing and preparing for this show. And today we're going to talk about export logistics. So there will be lots of checklists and a handout associated with this for you to think about what information you have now and what things you need to research and develop for the future. So it's one thing to have a beautiful product and to identify and connect with your customer and be able to communicate your offer. And then it's another thing to actually have all of the materials and documents required in order to export a shipment successfully so that your customer can then import it into their country and receive it on time and easily. So what we'll talk about is 2 different aspects of the logistics of export. One is we're going to talk about the licenses and documentation that you need to obtain or prepare in order to export successfully. And the second part that we'll talk about is shipping services and materials that you need to have access to in order to ensure affordable and reliable delivery of your export orders. So let's get started. So this is one of the standards that we talked about in our first videos about being export ready, so that you need to understand all of the export requirements to get a shipment out of your country, which could include any licenses as well as documentation. So these are the requirements to export out of your country and also the requirements for your buyer to import the shipment into their country. I want to emphasize that these change. The requirements will be different based on your country where you're based on the type of product that you have, and based on your customer and where they are. So I can't tell you exactly what you need, but I can tell you the types of things that you will need to research and identify based on your country, your product, and your customer. So what we want to look at is what are the requirements for exporting from your country? So what does your government require? And then also what documentation is needed so the buyer can import it into their country, right? So it's both aspects. Again, this will vary by country. This will vary by type of product you have, and this will vary based on your customer. So you need to do your own research and ask questions of your buyers. But hopefully this gives you an outline of what you need to do research on. So to determine the requirements for exporting from your country, some of the possibilities could include that you need to obtain an export license. So you need to understand what are the requirements for that, how much does it cost, what information do you need to provide, where you need to get one. You may need to also pay taxes or duties in order to export a shipment. It might be a percentage of the value of your shipment. It might be a flat fee in order to export. In order to import into or export out of your country, you might also need to have a country of origin certification. And then you might also be required to pay certain fees for the documentation per shipment. So it's really important that you understand the cost of all of these, because you need to include the costs of all of these in your FOB prices, like we talked to you about in an earlier video. So next you need to determine the documentation required for the buyer, for your customer, in order to import it into their country. So some of these could include a commercial invoice, which is almost always required, and we will go over what's included on a commercial invoice. It could also include a packing list, which is very important and very helpful, even if it's not required. It might also include a GSP Form A for Certificate of Origin. This is for the US market. It might include an airway bill or a bill of lading that comes from your shipping company. Might also include other certifications based on the materials. For example, in the US market, we have certain certificates for wood and for other materials. So let's look at these two most important documents. The first is a commercial invoice, and this is almost always required. Let's just say always required. And the reason why this is so important is this commercial invoice is what the customs for the importing country is going to look at in order to clear the shipment through customs, right? This is also what your buyer is going to use when they pay you. So it's important for all of the importing logistics to make sure the shipment can get through customs. And it's also important to make sure that you get paid the accurate amount. So just quickly, on a commercial invoice, you have to have the name of the seller, that's you, and the exporter. You have to have your address, phone number, email, and contact person. Then you need to have the buyer's name, their company, their address, their phone number, and their email, so it's easy to get in touch with them. You need to state the country of origin of the shipment, which is most likely your country. Then you need to have the quantity of each item. You need to have the FOB price of each item, or the Ex Works if you're doing Ex Works. You need to have the product description that includes the material content of the product and the function of the product. So for example, women's dress, cotton, 50% cotton, 50% polyester. You need to have your product code that you use. If you're shipping to the US, it's also very helpful to have the HTS code. That stands for the Harmonized Tariff System Code. If you're using it, it's not required. And then you need to put somewhere on here the airway bill number if you're shipping by air, or the shipping tracking number, like if you're shipping by a courier company. This is the information that you have to have on a commercial invoice in order to make sure it gets to your customer and passes through customs. You might also ask your customer if there's any other information that they require on the invoice. Also, that commercial invoice, this needs to be attached to the box number 1 of your shipment. You also need to send a copy of this by email to your buyer when you ship the order and send them the airway bill or tracking information. So the other thing that's always helpful is a packing list. So the packing list includes a lot of the same information that you find on that commercial invoice. It has the seller's information, that's all of your information. It has all of the buyer's information, their name, their company, their address, their phone number, and their email address. Then you have the number of boxes, total boxes in the shipment. And then you list the content for each individual box. And for each box or container, whatever you're using, you want to list the dimensions of that box and the weight of that box. And then you want to do the contents of each box. Okay. And you attach a copy of this packing list to box number 1 in your shipment. And then you mark all the other boxes with the number. So box number 1 of 3, number 2 of 3, number 3 of 3, for example. Okay. So this helps the buyer when they're receiving your goods to know what's in each box. It helps the customs and the importing team know what is in the content of each box in case they need to inspect it. Okay. So it's just a very helpful thing to do. It shows how professional you are. And we have a checklist of all the information that needs to be included on this. So those are the two most important documents that you need to be prepared to create for your buyers and for every export order. And you need to make sure all of the information that they are complete and accurate. So all of these costs, right? The licensing, the marketing costs, all of the documentation, all of those costs need to be calculated and included in your FOB price, right? Buyers do not want to be charged an extra amount for your export fees or duties. They don't want to be charged for your export license, right? All of those should be included in your FOB price, right? Because your FOB price includes all of the price, that's all of your costs up to the point that that shipment leaves your country, right? So as an activity, what I'd like you to do is make a list of all the documentation you need to export from your company and import into your target market, and then list the costs. So those documents or the license, right? You need to do some research, or what are the export requirements for your country and your type of product. Make a list of all those things so you have a little checklist that you work off of for every export shipment. And then you want to calculate what are the costs for preparing those documents and any fees associated, so that you're just very cognizant of including those costs in the cost of an export order. Alrighty, now let's talk about shipping services and materials. So your responsibility is to make sure that you have access to shipping services and packing materials to ensure affordable, right, the most cost-effective and reliable way to ship orders to your export clients. So what does this entail? First, you want to identify the right shipping services for your business and your products. And there's really 4 different ways that you can ship globally. One is you can ship by courier. That would be a company like DHL or FedEx, or there are many other ones. That's the fastest, but it's also the most expensive way to ship, right? It's good for samples, sample orders. It can also be good for very small and lightweight shipments. The next way to ship is by air freight, which is very fast and it's very affordable for non-bulky items, like much of your clothing is. It's very expensive for bulky items, right? But that's air freight. Let's go back. A courier company. A courier is going to handle all the export documentation and all of the clearing the shipment through customs on the importing country's side. Air freight, you'll have to prepare all the documentation and export fees yourself, deliver it to the airline company, and then your buyer on the other side is going to have to be responsible for hiring a customs broker to clear it through customs on the other side. That's really one of the big differences between courier and air freight. The next option is to ship by sea, which is a sea shipment. That's the most affordable, particularly for bulky items, but it also takes the longest time. And my guess is that it's not going to be the appropriate method of shipping for any of you. Then you could also work with a freight forwarder who can arrange both air and sea, and they can also help with the paperwork and expediting shipments. So those are the 4 ways. So research the options that are available in your country. Figure out what's the best for your type of product and for the type of customer and your average export order, the cost and the size of your average export order, right? And do the research ahead of time. So one thing you'll want to do as you are researching these shipping companies is you'll want to understand the cost of shipping services for your orders. Now, this, if you're shipping, if you're selling at FOB prices, right, your buyer will be responsible for paying the shipping. If you're selling at landed or DDP prices, you will be responsible for the cost of shipping. So whether or not your customer is paying for the shipping or you're paying for the shipping, you want to understand the cost of it. So here's how we suggest doing it. We want you to determine the size, so the dimensions and the weight of a sample order, right? So if somebody was going to order some samples for you, what do you think they would order, and what would the dimensions and weight be? And then you want to figure out what is the best way to ship it, and what will it cost, and how long will it take it to arrive to your customer. So most likely you're going to want to ship that by courier. So contact the courier companies and negotiate the best rates with them, so that you'll know how much and how long it'll take. The second thing you'll want to do is you want to determine the size, so that's both dimensions and weight, of your average export order or your minimum order for export. And then you'll want to determine what are the shipping costs, either by courier or by air. What would be the cost of that, and how long will it take to arrive to your customer? Okay, so for example, you want to know, let's say your average or your minimum order for export is 1,000 US dollars, and you'll want to ship it by courier, and the courier cost to ship an order like that to, let's say, Paris is going to be $200. So you just want to know how much that is, so that you can give that information to your customer, or so that you can include that information in your pricing if you're going to offer those landed or DDP prices. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is you understand the different types of packaging and packing materials that you need. And there's really kind of three types of packaging. So the first one is what we'll call the primary packaging. So that's what the final customer is going to see. So those are packaging that's really very closely attached to each individual product. The second is what the retailer or wholesaler handles as they receive the product and unwrap it and put it on their shelves. And then the freight packaging is kind of what you're using for transportation. So let's look at each of them. So for primary product packaging and labeling, there's a couple that are required. And this you'll have to talk with your customer to see what's required for them and what's required for their country. But most all textile related products and apparel related products require a country of origin label. So it's a label that's sewn into or attached to the product that says made in and the country that you're from. You could also say product of and the country that you're from. The second type of labeling is for material content. And for the US market, this is required for any shipment that comes into the US that's textile related. You'll need to do the type of material it is and the percentage. So for example, 100% cotton, or 50% cotton, 50% polyester. And that again also has to be attached to the product. Very often, your buyers will also ask you to include labeling that says how you should care for or clean the products. Do they need to be hand washed? Do they need to be sent to the dry cleaners, etc.? And then you also must put your product code and product name on there so that your buyer understands which product it is as it relates to the invoice. So that's for the labeling. For the packaging, really the packaging that you need to have in this primary packaging is some kind of box or plastic bag or other materials that keeps that individual product protected during shipping so that it doesn't get dirty or it doesn't get damaged by rubbing up against other products or from the other elements. So some of the materials you might need are stickers or labels, tags, boxes, plastic bags, bubble wrap, right? So these are the materials you want to make sure you have access to. The secondary and freight packaging and labeling is the boxes that you are using and the packaging that you're using to bundle up those orders into boxes or containers for shipments. So for the labeling in this, you're going to need to mark all boxes with the shipping address and the buyer's name. As we talked earlier, you're going to want all those boxes to be numbered 1 of 10, 1 of 3, etc. And then any kind of labeling with special handling, keep dry, fragile, handle with care, etc. Be sure to ask your buyer what packaging and labeling they require or they want. It's a great question. Ultimately, they need to define what's required for their country, but asking them also is just a great way to show how professional you are and responsible you are. So for packing in terms of secondary and freight packaging, the things that you might need are cardboard boxes, shredded or crushed paper, maybe cardboard structures in there to organize product, maybe plastic bubble wrap or some of those air cushion plastic bags, possibly some plastic wrapping, especially for textiles to keep things clean. Wooden crates and pallets if you're doing shipping by large air freight shipments or by sea. And you might also need some shipping straps to help really secure those boxes. So can you charge your customer for the cost of packaging and labeling? No, all standard packaging for export and the labeling must be included in your FOB prices. So, but if an export customer requests special labeling or packaging, you can negotiate extra fees if they want to have a certain, type of care card inserted in it, or if they want their label put on your product along with yours, you could do that. So anything extra kind of above and beyond what you usually do, you can charge an extra fee. So for an activity, what I'd like you to do is just list the shipping companies that you can ship with, right? Identify what type they are, courier, air freight, sea freight, or freight forwarder. And then I want you to calculate the cost for shipping of a sample order. So maybe that's 2 or 3 pieces that you make, as well as your average or your minimum export order. And then last, I want you to make a list of all the materials that you have available for labeling and packaging for export orders. That list will be very helpful to provide to your buyers so that they see how you will be preparing their order for export. So I hope this video was helpful. It's lots of details about kind of the nitty-gritty requirements to get export orders exported and imported into your target country successfully. Thank you so much, and I look forward to continuing the work with you.